Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first receiver, Parker Washington of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we saw Travis Hunter. He was down in practice. Reports came out he couldn't play this week in the latter part of the week. And Parker Washington stepped in and played good football. And we saw Brian Thomas leave the game at the Vegas Raiders and Donnie Brown leave the game with a concussion. So Parker Washington made the most of his opportunity. And he's a nice waiver wire add this week, available in 82% of leagues. The last few weeks, week 6 versus Seattle, 2 catches, 29 yards. Week 7 versus the Rams, 3 carries, 10 yards, 4 catches, 52 yards, 10 targets. And then week 9 at the Raiders, 8 catches, 90 yards on 9 targets. He's a good possession receiver, crisp route runner underneath, not going to be a deep ball threat or a big yard after catch guy is Parker Washington. But him and Trevor Lawrence, they've had rapport going back a few seasons. And now if Thomas is out with the ankle injury and Donnie Brown without the concussion, he's easily going to be the number one wide receiver in this lineup for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. But even if Donnie Brown does come back, I still think Parker Washington will be ahead of him in most 2 wide receiver sets. And week 10, it's a matchup at Houston where they're good defense, obviously, but I still think Washington could be a decent flex option for fantasy owners. And like I said, 82% of leagues, he's out there. Next receiver, Darius Slayton of the New York Giants. He's out there right now in 65% of fantasy leagues is Darius Slayton. And obviously, he's a big part of this offense. Him, Wendell Robinson, and Theo Johnson, pretty much the 3 options in the passing game. And we know this Giant team, 2-7 on the season. They're going to be chasing points in the majority of these games the remainder of the season. And that's where Slayton comes into play week 8. When he returned from injury at Philly, 2 catches, 26 yards. He got called back a 75-yard touchdown on offensive passing interference. And then week 9, a decent game versus the Niners. 5 catches, 62 yards on 7 targets. So week 10, another matchup with a good Bear offense that they're going to put points on the board. And New York's going to have to chase in this one. And they do give up the 14th most fantasy points to receivers on the season. We just saw T. Higgins have a big game for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Yosivas found the end zone as well versus the Chicago Bear defense. I think Darius Slayton as a flex option, a 4th receiver, could be good for fantasy owners. Like I said, with no neighbor out for the season and Scatterbo obviously out of the backfield, they're going to pass the football even more, I think, this Giant team. So Slayton out there, like I said, 65% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. So Watson, he finally returned to the lineup in week 8 at Pittsburgh. Had a good game, 4 catches, 85 yards. And then week 9 versus the Panthers, he got banged up a little bit, but he stayed in the game in the upset loss. 2 catches, 58 yards on 4 targets. Week 10, Green Bay, they got to right the ship a little bit. Very tough matchup versus Philadelphia. And Green Bay, they're going to have to put points on the board versus this Eagle team, where we know Philadelphia, one of the best offensive teams in all pro football. Christian Watson, he's a good deep ball threat. We've seen it going back with Rodgers a few years ago, and we've seen flashes with Jordan Love and Christian Watson. But injuries have definitely held him back, and we know he's a big potential play wide receiver. Right now available in 71% of fantasy leagues, and they need to stretch the field more, is this Green Bay Packer team. And also as well, now with Matthew Golden banged up, and we don't know what his status is going into next week, Watson could step in and get more targets possibly and more plays his way. Next receiver, Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. So this offense, they just spread that football out all over the football field, is this Indianapolis offense with Daniel Jones. I know it was a lot of garbage time in that ball game at the Pittsburgh Steelers where they lost and Jones turned the football over 5 times. But now 2 out of 3 games, double-digit fantasy games for Alec Pierce, out there in 74% of fantasy leagues. And to go over 100 yards is a big game. Garbage time and not. Week 7 at the Chargers, 5 catches, 98 yards, 10 targets. Week 8 versus Tennessee, 2 catches, 69 yards, 5 targets. And week 9 at Pittsburgh, 6 for 115 on 13 targets. So the targets are there. He's not just a deep ball threat like he was for previous seasons with other quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco. Was Alec Pierce. Now he's starting to run more routes, starting to make more plays. And him and Daniel Jones definitely have had a good rapport over the last month of the season. So with those factors and a good matchup coming up versus Atlanta, Alec Pierce definitely a good add this week. Like I said, out there in 74% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Torrey Horton of the Seattle Seahawks. Torrey Horton, he's a rookie, and we've seen flashes from him early in the season. But in week 9, he had a nice ball game where Cooper Kupp was out and took advantage of it. 4 catches, 48 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 4 targets. Obviously, a little bit fluky. Only 4 targets, caught all of them, had the 2 touchdowns. The Seahawk offense, they were locked in and nice, feeling good coming off the bye week in week 8. And week 10, a pretty good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. But like I said, I think Cooper Kupp will be back. Sat this one out. He was trying to get on the field, but just couldn't give it a go. But this week, it looks like it's a good possibility he could. Is Cooper Kupp a Torrey Horton, a guy early in the season as a sleeper option? We didn't see much from him, but this is his potential some weeks, where in week 9, like I said, at the Commanders, he had a good game. So right now, if you want to take a flyer on him in deeper leagues, he's out there in 95% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. We saw Kayshon Boutte. He left the ball game with a hamstring injury. He didn't return. And Demario Douglas, the last few weeks anyway, has been putting up numbers. But this was his best game of the season in week 9 versus the Falcons. 4 catches, 100 yards, and found the end zone. So 2 out of 4 weeks, he's had double-digit fantasy points. And if Boutte's going to miss time with the hamstring injury, which obviously that injury takes a while to heal, depending, how you hurt it and your age. Even though we've seen a guy like Emeka Buka early in the season, he didn't miss any time with a hamstring injury. Week 5 at Buffalo, 2 catches, 17 yards. Week 6 at the Saints, 3 catches, 71 yards, a touchdown. Week 7 at the Titans, 3 catches, 17 yards. And Week 8 versus the Browns, 2 carries, 3 yards, a catch, 44 yards. And Week 9 versus the Falcons, like I said, 4 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. So he's been a deep ball threat for Drake May. Drake May is a quarterback that's spreading the football out and making big plays for this New England Patriot team. So right now, while Douglas is out there in 96% of fantasy leagues and he's making plays, and if Boutte misses time, he could be a good flex option for fantasy owners. And the final receiver, Adonai Zaccheaus of the Chicago Bears. So Zaccheaus, we've seen some flashes from him over the last few seasons on and off. Going back to his Atlanta Falcon days, he was with the Eagles for a little bit, and now here with the Chicago Bears. And he's had a couple decent games, but 2 games in a row with double-digit fantasy points, where Luther Burden has been banged up and he's been operating as the number 3 wide receiver. Zaccheaus, Week 7 versus New Orleans, 2 catches, 9 yards. Week 8 at Baltimore, 7 catches, 33 yards, 7 targets. And Week 9 at Cincinnati, 6 catches, 58 yards, a touchdown on 8 targets. So 2 games, 15 targets. Him and Caleb have a rapport going. Zaccheaus, he could run in different formations in the slot, on the outside, or even end around type of guy with his speed. And this week here, good matchup with the Giants coming up. It's most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But like I said, Zaccheaus, he's more than a deep league ad. And if Luther Burden does return to the lineup, he'll slot down to that number 4 wide receiver. So that's a few receivers I'll rotate off the wire for week 10 of the fantasy football season.